speak up at any time. My hope is that we can talk through some of this abstract and introductory stuff about Casper, and then we can spend a while on this section, Casper the Friendly Binary Consensus. So who all has read the first two sections of this paper, Vlad's Casper TFG paper? Tomislav, I'm not sure. Are you talking? I can't hear you.
So I've read it a week ago.
Oh, nice.
Or two. So, and I've just skipped over the first section and started to look at the second, but then the meeting started. So.
Oh, okay. You started here at Friendly Binary Consensus?
Yeah, just went over the first section and then was in the middle part of the second section when the meeting started. So it might be the case that some of the definitions are not 100% in my mind. But.
Yeah, totally. Same thing. And like, you know, for me, I feel like I have a decent working knowledge of how Casper works. When it gets down to like individual definitions, I sometimes struggle. And so we can talk through that stuff together. So I guess, where should we start? Let me just put this as a question to the field. Should we start right here and dive in and like run through an example of friendly binary consensus, or should we try to talk about some of the definitions first? What's everybody in the mood for?
I would suggest that we start at the top.
Okay.
And then go through it.
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds like a plan. So let's see. Maybe I'll just start by reading some of the abstract here. We present a specification and limited experimental observations for a blockchain-based consensus protocol, Casper the Friendly Ghost. So he says we use an adaptation of the GHOST algorithm, which is the greedy heaviest observed subtree, as their fork choice rule. So GHOST is really cool. I first heard of GHOST on a podcast, and if anyone listens to the Epicenter podcast, there's a really great episode where they talk about GHOST and then some follow-up research called Spectre. So that would be a good place to dig in on GHOST. Basically, the idea of GHOST, and you guys can help me if I'm wrong here, I think the idea of GHOST, as I understood it, was in Bitcoin, you have like the longest chain, and that's it. Anything that's not part of the longest chain, forget about it, because it's not what we're supposed to build on. And the problem there is, due to network latency and all kinds of other things, people can, without trying to attack the network, just doing honest work, accidentally create forks in the Bitcoin blockchain. And it would be great if we didn't have to throw away all of that work on other chains, if we could somehow incorporate them back in. And so I think Ethereum also uses GHOST, or at least some limited version of GHOST, to allow blocks that were not on the main chain to come back in. And then RChain generalizes that really nicely into a DAG, or directed acyclic graph.
Yeah, so in Ethereum, it is just a reference to an uncle that can be included in the main chain. And so it kind of gives it kind of disincentivizes, or it gives an incentive even to those, or at least a reward to those peoples who might have a bad internet connection, and it kind of disincentivizes the formation of, or at least it reduces the incentivization of creating mining pools by that, because otherwise it would centralize the architecture a lot, since you would gain an advantage by pooling all the resources together in order to make just the connectivity more efficient, so that you mine at least the lowest amount of uncles.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
If there wouldn't be if there wouldn't be given out a reward. But in Ethereum, it is the case that there's just a reference to it, but it is not, in that case, it is kind of part of the state, but the transactions are not somewhat. So there was work done, and we acknowledge that. Yeah, is
So
just
that's interesting, Phil. So you're saying in Ethereum they still have the pointers to the what they call uncles there.
Mhm.
Like you're saying like the transactions in those uncle blocks still don't count. They still have to go back into the main chain somewhere.
yeah, as far as I know, that's the case.
Oh,
It's just,
cool. I didn't realize that. But in our
yeah,
chain, that's not the case, right? In our chain, even we don't use the word uncles, but even those blocks that are not the primary parents, those transactions still count.
yeah, and that's the case because we have this kind of DAG structure
Yeah.
where you can have multiple parents.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on to so the rest of the abstract here, I guess. It's also it's able to finalize or decide on blocks with asynchronous and Byzantine fault-tolerant consensus safety. It allows blocks to be finalized while the network operates with the overhead of the Bitcoin blockchain, with each node receiving O of 1 messages per block. This is in contrast to the O of N traditionally required for Byzantine fault-tolerant state machine replication. So I'm not super familiar with the sort of the traditional techniques. You know, I came into all this distributed and decentralized stuff through Bitcoin. Vlad does talk about a protocol called Paxos down here. And Paxos is pretty interesting. I don't know, we probably don't need to dive into it too much today, but there is oops, that's not the one I meant to show. There is this resource on the web at paxos.systems, and the title is Paxos Made Moderately Complex. So I think it's supposed to be like, you know, Paxos made easy, but the bottom line is it's not that easy. So they're settling for making it only a little bit complex. I skimmed some of this, and it's very approachable, but you know how time is constrained for everybody. So I never really made it through. But if you want to know the history, this might be a decent place to start. So okay, let's jump ahead to 1.1. Traditional protocols like Paxos are notoriously difficult to understand. Blockchain consensus protocols, on the other hand, are much more accessible. The difference comes, at least in part, from the relative simplicity of Bitcoin's specification. So in the context of state machine replication, traditional protocols like Paxos, they decide with irrevocable finality on one block of state transitions to add to the shared operation log time. So, and then it says to decide on a block, node must receive O of n messages, where n is the number of consensus forming nodes. So basically, I think what it means is when I share my screen, I don't get to know who's in this call, but maybe there's like 8 of us on this call. So if we were all trying to decide on finality based on the traditional methods like Paxos, we would have to see like approximately 8 messages before we can really decide. And he's saying, whereas here, a constant number of messages, or maybe roughly equal to 1, is gonna be sufficient.
With only one message from one node, like from one validator.
So that's how I'm reading what he writes here. But to be honest with you, as I've played through this game, I don't see how that's actually what it's going to be, because he does say here, up in the abstract, he says each node receiving O of 1 messages per block, and that's in contrast to the O of n in the traditional.
Exactly.
I don't think that this is like a one message.
Oh, it is constant at least. I mean, just imagine in Casper the Friendly Ghost, as implemented currently in RChain, there's just the one protocol message, which is the block in itself. And in traditional systems, they would require that each of the kind of other nodes in the network just, for example, vote on a certain state or whatsoever. And that's the difference.
So imagine we're all here and we're all playing Casper the Friendly Ghost, and like, Phil, I get some message from you, and the kinds of messages you can send are ones like, here's what I think the new state of the DAG, or here's the new state, right? You send me a bunch of protocol state transitions and suggest that you think they're accurate and should be the next state, and then how do I don't immediately believe that that's what we're going to come to finality on, right? Like, I need to see other validators also saying, like, yes, I've seen what Phil created and it's probably good.
True, but that is with the next then with the next block, with the next state transition. So you're basically signaling by doing the next step on top.
Understood. Okay. So I get it.
At least that's my understanding.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So you've sent me some block, and I see it and it looks good to me. But before I can say like I totally agree or I trust it fully, I need to know that other validators have also seen it and believe it. So when Tomislav sends me a message that says I've seen Phil's block, that's not all he's saying. He's saying I've seen Phil's block, and here's all the next stuff that I'm building on top of it.
True, and within the block there is also this justification, so that you see that what I've came up with is following the protocol.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And also this must be the same as both of us sent to you, right? This justification is like
as tolerate less than a third of Byzantine faults or up to T faults when there are 3 T+1 nodes.
Is this like a practical limit or like theoretical limit?
Isaac, do you want to talk about that? We talked about that a little bit the other day.
So what were we saying? We thought it was a third because if there was more than a third, then the rest of the network could kind of be 1/2 of the rest of the network, or more than 1/2 of the network could be influenced by the 1/3 that's faulty. I think that was my recollection of what we're talking about, but I may be mistaken.
Oh, there is a mathematical way to come up with the 1/3 out of safety and liveness assumptions, but I don't have it in mind.
So I think
there is a talk by Vlad where he shows how to come up with a number 1/3.
Let me think out loud about this, because I feel like I have the very little tiniest seed of why this works, and then you guys can help me understand what part of that makes sense and the most of it that doesn't. So I think there's something like, imagine if we're all here colluding together to try to mess up the network, and we represent a third of the valid, or let's say like 1/3 plus 1 of the network. So we're like just barely over that 1/3 threshold. So what we may want to do to prevent consensus from ever being reached is try to partition the honest validators. So we go to half of the honest validators. So that's another third of the network, right? We're the dishonest third. There's a half the honest is another third, half the honest is another third. So we go to half the honest validators and we say, we think that the bit is going to be 0. And then we go to the other half of the honest validators and we say, we think that the bit is going to be 1. So now each of the sets of honest validators has said, like we saw these messages coming in that said it's going to be 0, and a third of the network said that, and we're going to follow along because all we're trying to do is reach consensus here. So the third of all validators, the half of the honest validators to whom we said 0 is the right answer, they think that 2/3 of the network is saying that. Their honest portion and we bad guys sum to 2/3, and they're like, oh, 2/3 of the network is saying 0 is the answer. So that's safe. Everyone's going to agree it's 0. Meanwhile, the other half of the honest validators are saying, oh, we half of the honest validators and all these dishonest ones, we're all saying 1. So we think that 2/3 of the network is saying 1 is the answer, and so we are able to like partition them that way.
How can the 2/3 have conclude that it's 0 and also conclude it's 1?
Yeah, because the 2/3 that concluded it was 0 includes the dishonest validators who are equivocating, or we're saying different things to different peers. So we as dishonest validators are breaking the protocol by saying to some of our peers it's going to be 0, and saying to other of our peers it's going to be 1. So I'm trying to play this out. Imagine we're trying to like agree on where we're going to meet for dinner or something. And so I come up to you and I'm like, hey, Tomislav, I talked to a bunch of people and we're going to meet at the mall. And then I go up to Jim and I'm like, hey, Jim, I talked to a bunch of people and we're going to meet at the movie theater. Both of you are going to assume that I'm honest and go to wherever I said, because if there were 3 of us going to meet, and so like, Tomislav, you and I have talked and we agreed on the mall, right? So that's 2/3 of us. Let's go to the mall. So you go to the mall. And then the same thing happens with Jim. I'm like, Jim, we're going to go to the movie theater, and that's 2/3 of us. So he ends up at the movie theater. And then meanwhile, I sit back saying, haha, I tricked you guys. One of you is in one place and the other one's in a different place.
But we also can talk each other and say, okay, What do you tell me?
Right, exactly. So that's why I don't feel like I fully understand this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this goes back to the original Byzantine generals problem paper, though. I mean, that's where all this stuff goes back to. But I remember Michael Birch talking about this exact thing in the interview at Archon 3, and he was more or less saying what you were just saying, Joshy, and basically like the malicious actors or whatever, the people who are not following the protocol. Right, it's like they send two different messages to one half of the people. They tell one thing, and to the other half of the people another thing, and so they'll never come to consensus on what their actual action should be. And so, I mean, at least that's how I'm understanding it. But maybe require a more in-depth look at the actual paper to really get at it.
Yeah, that's the basic traditional Byzantine fault tolerance analysis. Of having a safety as well as liveness guaranteed. And I put a link in the chat where there's a simple where they came up with this 2/3 from a more mathematical standpoint.
Oh, nice. Hey, Phil, can you do me a favor? Can you drop that in Discord too, so it persists after we're done here?
Oh, that's a great idea.
Maybe this CBC Casper channel is probably a good one. This was basically dead for a long time until we revived it recently, so I think we can.
This is just the first one I found. So it is most probably also in every wiki page for Byzantine fault tolerant consensus or whatsoever.
Yeah.
But
okay. So 1.3 here, consensus safety proof. Each of the protocols presented satisfies the same consensus safety proof. And indeed, the consensus protocol generated by CBC process satisfies the same proof.
Wait, hold on a second. Can we go back to the first section? I know we're like far past that at this point, but I realized I had a question there. So they were talking about, let me see exactly. So he was Bitcoin network in, let's see. He's about asynchrony in the Bitcoin network and why it's not safe in an asynchronous network. And I wasn't sure that I completely understood what he was getting at, and I just kind of wanted to figure that out. So is he saying that the Bitcoin blockchain is not safe in an asynchronous network because you can be sure about the order that messages are sent in, or what exactly is he getting at? I can find exactly where it is.
Yeah, it's here. I got it highlighted.
You got it. Oh, okay.
I also don't know the answer to that question. I wondered about that same thing.
Okay.
So, traditional.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that's to anybody really.
Focused on producing. So I guess maybe a good place to start with that is, what does it mean to be asynchronously safe? Oh, he's got it right here. Blocks won't be reverted due to arbitrary timing of future. Oh, so yeah, okay. So I think Bitcoin, so he says, on the other hand, Bitcoin blockchain is not safe in an asynchronous network, but it is safe and live for unknown block depth or confirmation count in a partially synchronous network. So I think what it means is, imagine you've got some local view of the Bitcoin blockchain, and you're up to block 100, and you're going to continue mining on block 100. But because we're in an asynchronous network, maybe you haven't received any blocks from me in a really long time, and then all of a sudden you get like 10 or 20 blocks from me that forked off from the blockchain like 3 blocks earlier. Now, because the network was asynchronous, because you got all of my messages late, what you thought was the longest chain and the proper place to be mining, turns out it's not, because I've created this longer chain. You just hadn't heard of it yet. Does that seem like?
That totally makes sense. Yeah, I was thinking in terms of transaction, not in terms of blocks. So yeah, that totally makes sense.
So he does say, he quotes it, but he says partially synchronous network. I think maybe that means like, assuming that you're not getting network delays of like more than a day or whatever, some threshold that everyone would consider reasonable, then in that case, you have some safety guarantees. Like once the block you care about is buried 20 blocks deep in the chain, you assume that you haven't just missed messages for that long. You can maybe consider that block safe. Maybe that's how I'm taking this for now.
Is this related to order of the messages in the block? Because in the Bitcoin you must have the same order of the messages of transactions, right?
That's a good question. I don't know.
I guess it's not pointing towards that, but pointing more towards the section before finality, that you have just economic finality in Bitcoin, so that anyone can come up with a more longer chain and can start even mining from Genesis, and then you would discard all of the blocks you've mined on before, or blocks mined before. And it's more pointing towards that point. In relation to that, Casper, there's this finite resource of a staked amount of tokens, and you can't come up with a resource and mine from 0 to the longest chain. As the validator said, is given for a time.
What was that last part, Phil? The validator?
As the validator said, is given for a specific time. And there is such as a weak subjectivity given on the validator set.
I've heard that phrase, weak subjectivity. What are we? Is that's going to come up in here eventually? I guess, or
I don't know.
What is it? Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Most likely, my definition won't be that precise. I would highly recommend to read Vitalik's blog post about it. But it is the point that in Bitcoin, you have this notion of burning a resource, and so that's the reason behind this. And in proof of stake, you just show that you're at a given point in time, you're in possession of a given resource, but you're not burning this resource. You're just showing that you locked up a certain amount of token. And that means that there is no objective way to say basically to start from the Genesis block and come up with the current state, because in any time validators could go back at a point back in time and use their keys to generate a new alternative chain. And therefore we have these kind of long unbonding times where over several months you just need to wait to unbond your tokens, so that everyone else is given the chance to come on to a social consensus that this stage is kind of done. Because there's
so I've heard people talk about the long range attacks. Is that relevant to what you're talking about now?
Yeah, exactly.
So if I understood, can I tell you what I think a long range attack is, and then you tell me if it's right?
Sure.
So my understanding was, like, if I'm a validator in Casper, like on RChain, for example, and I say I want to unbond, like I don't want to be a validator anymore, and I've never done anything dishonest. I haven't been slashed or anything. I've just been a normal validator, and now I want to unbond, so I get all my tokens back, right? So the problem is, if I get my tokens back immediately, like in the next block after I say that I want to unbond, well, that's great. And once some block has this transaction where I get all my tokens back, then I just go to the last block before I got them back, where I'm still a validator. And then I say, like, whoa, I never meant to unbond. Here's all these new blocks I'm creating. Yeah. And so then I can have my tokens back in one chain and still be a validator in the different one.
Yeah.
But what's the danger? Oh, the danger is in the chain where I got my tokens back. I maybe could have paid them to you for an actual real world good or service, and then.
Exactly. Yeah. So you can basically double spend in this alternative chain that you kind of build up. And so there is this mechanism of this unbonding time to avoid that users can use their old keys in order to create an alternative chain without being punished for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so the solution is I declare I don't want to be a validator anymore. And effective immediately, I'm no longer a validator, but my tokens are still locked up for a month or whatever long period of time before I get them back. And then the idea is by the time I actually get my tokens back, all of those blocks in the meantime are like finalized. And so I can't do that double spend anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. but it also means that it is kind of hard, or I guess it's even impossible to come up with an objective criteria. So if you're a new user and you start up a new node and you haven't heard of the validator sets before, you kind of need to trust someone to give you the initial set of validators in order to kind of come up with the current state. Whereas in Bitcoin, you kind of have this kind of waste of resource. So it's basically a proof of wasted resource, and it is kind of an objective criteria. You can just see what is the current longest chain. So where has the most energy, which chain spent the most energy basically, or most computation.
So why does that not work in Casper? If I want to join the network and I know about the Genesis block, because that, or maybe I take that on faith, right? You got to take something on faith. So I take the Genesis block on faith, and then all of the transactions. So there's a set of Genesis validators, right? And then every time a new validator bonds or unbonds, those transactions are recorded in the blockchain. So why can't I go through the whole blockchain like I can in Bitcoin and say like, yep, this checks out, it adds up to the current state?
Because it's exactly this long range attack. So imagine that almost all validators from the first validator set come together after they've all unbonded a few months later. And then they say, okay, let's go back to the Genesis block and start a totally different new chain. So which chain do you follow?
Right. So now I, as a new guy who I have this like libertarian attitude of the only thing I'm going to believe ever on faith is the Genesis block. Now I have to decide like which chain is the real one.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the point of this weak subjectivity. You must be either you trust a source of what is the current validator set, or you have at least be online every X month in order to keep the current validator sets and to keep up with the current state of the blockchain.
That's super interesting. So 100 years from now, someone who's coming into this can take the Bitcoin blockchain and verify for themselves without trusting anybody which one's real, but with Casper, that's not the case.
Sure, in a way, that's true, but also I can give you the reasonable argument that you need to trust any party anyway. So, or at least let's say there is always this notion of social consensus.
Yeah.
There's always this notion that we look in our society, or in our community, which Bitcoin client is currently running, which protocol, what is used by the exchanges, what is used by the
right. When I want to buy my groceries, which validator set does the grocery store believe is the real one?
Yeah, for example.
Okay, yeah.
And I guess this partially synchronous network point also towards this from the other aspect that in Bitcoin, therefore it is also possible to okay, now I can't do a good argument for that.
But you're saying that you in this case you have more than a third of faulty validators, right? To say this is the right chain. But if you connect to enough validators, you can say, okay, you're telling me this is the wrong chain. In all of these messages in each block, you can find out who is the validator, and you can find out which validator are trusted for that validator, and you can go on and on. So I'm thinking, can you just
in which protocol?
expand the view of validator in Casper? You can go through messages, and you can find all the validators and see if all are saying the same thing.
True. And now what kind of property does that?
I mean, if you want to choose between multiple multiple chains.
True.
How to find out which is the right chain?
Yeah, but
which has the more validators, right?
More validators. I mean, in that example that I gave, the validator set is exactly the same, but all the validators from, for example, the Genesis block, they go back and create this alternative chain. So you are in this kind of tricky situation where you see two chains, but you don't know basically which one to follow.
But all of these validators must came from the root shard, right? They are as like a child chain of the root chain.
Oh, I guess we are not talking yet about sharding.
Right, but I think, Tomislav, what you're asking is like if there's a fork in the chain, like they all started from the same Genesis block.
Like in the same shard.
Yeah, so far we've only talked about
but they must be more than 2/3, right? In that case, if they are on the same chain.
Yeah, but the question is, what if the chain forks? If there's a split in the chain and two of them are surviving to some extent.
But in each block is like a fork. Each block is a fork, right?
Each block is a fork.
It can be, and then the fork with the like a higher weight succeeds. And
see if I can come up with a helpful graphic here. How about this one? So here's our Genesis block, and then some other normal block, and then at some point there's this fork here, right? So here I am. I'm new. I haven't seen any of this. I just heard about RChain and I want to get involved. And I've heard two different things. I've heard that this is the real RChain, and I've also heard that this is the real RChain. So
different validators, right?
You're saying this block has different validators than this block?
Yeah, it must be, because if the same validator saying these things, it's faulty. It's lying.
Then.
Yeah, it would be an equivocation.
Right. I think, yeah, okay, right. So yes, so they have different validator sets. That's right.
So you must choose which validators are the real one.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And if you have more validators.
And that's the point why you either you have to trust a party and to provide you this validator set, the current validator set, or you have to be online at least once in a while to get the current validator set, so that you can go back in time and see what's the current chain. And this is the weak subjectivity assumption.
Right. So in Bitcoin, there's an objective rule so that I can figure out which one it is. But here we have to just know, we have to at least trust some validator or a set of validators.
Or at least be once in a while online to.
Yeah. Right.
Is this the number of validators? Is this the weight that we are counting? Or?
Yeah, I don't think
sure.
We could make, any individual person could say to themselves like, well, I'm just going to trust whichever one of these has more validators. But I don't think that's a good rule, because, maybe if I maliciously created this fork on the right side and I just spin up, I can spin up as many validator nodes as I want. So now maybe this one has twice as many, but this other chain still has social consensus. Like it's the one where everyone's going to accept it.
How can you spin up any number of validators? This is not easy.
Don't you need like hardware to do that?
No. I mean, you must have approval from all the other validators. So, because your child blocks, and other validators in like your parents know what you're doing. You must.
So here's one attack. How to do it. Imagine you're even further. So this block 101 is not even the Genesis block, but even far back. And then it's one user, and in between the whole validator set has changed, and there's there's this validator set from the Genesis block, and so you approach each of those validators from the Genesis block and pay them to give their private keys, and they have an incentive because they can't lose any money, and their private key is worthless at this point. So they give you the private keys, and now you might end up with more than 2/3, maybe 80% of the total staked amount at the Genesis block. And then what you do next is basically you can try to create a total new chain which has a different validator set than the current one, and you can build up the chain, and no one knows when a new party joins. This party doesn't know which chain is the real one, because there is no objective criteria which one is better.
But you're saying that you owned more than 2/3 of validators, or 1/3. So if you can
cost you almost anything, because those private keys from previous validators, they're worthless because they got their money back, and they think, okay, whatsoever, I get a few bucks for my worthless private key. And so you can end up with a lot of stake from for example, a lot of validator stake at the point of the Genesis block for paying almost nothing, and then you can build up your own chain, do whatever you like, and come up with is this basically also a similar block height, and then no one knows what is the real chain without knowing what's the current validator set.
And how would the Casper protect us from this kind of attack?
So the only mechanism, or the most important mechanism that's in there is the unbonding times. So this kind of gives so when you want to unbond, you kind of send this kind of message to the unbonding contract, and then there is this unbonding period, which is a couple of months, where it takes that much time to get you the bonding amount back, and after that time frame, it is assumed that all of those parties that has been offline in the meantime, they got at least once online and got the current validator set. So that this is kind of the way how this is mitigated. And
they will probably get in the information all the validators they're unbounded, and
they get
because you don't trust anymore these validators. So.
Pardon?
You don't trust these validators anymore. So you want to know, okay, these public keys are not valid, right?
Yeah. So you get the current validator sets, and so that you know, okay, this is the one where I want to get the blocks from or whatsoever. Yeah.
All right.
So wait, just so I'm clear, the unbonding process, you blacklist the key that a validator was using to cash out or something? Or what exactly happens to that private key?
What was the question?
So in the unbonding process, so a validator is using some private key as like their, right? So they and or like a key on a blacklist, like it's no longer a valid private key to use for a validator or something along those lines.
You mean so that no one can ever rebond with the same key pair later?
Right.
I don't know.
So that you can't do this, like all of your, private key, like some individual that's just trying to accumulate private keys.
Oh, well, it would, even if we blacklist it, it would just be going forward in the blockchain, and the long range attack works by going back a few blocks to before the unbonding happened.
Okay. And then that's why this unbonding period has to be like a month or months or, you know, some lines.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Doesn't this boil down to the question if in both parents' block the same validator set needs to be true? I mean, every validator sees his previous block as justification, nonetheless. And if I vote now, if I pair this now with a justification to another block where this validator posted this block, which is not present in my parent block, am I allowed for this? This is the question in my eyes. Also.
I might need a diagram to understand that question.
The question was, in the parent blocks, does the validator set exactly the same?
Yes, this is the question, because if it needs to be the same, I cannot include another block where they are not the same. If they don't need to be the same, I could theoretically take this other chain in my chain.
At some point, there must be the case that the validator set of the previous block is not the same as the current block, because otherwise you won't have validator rotation. You would have just forever the same validator set.
True, you say, so at one block it will start and this needs to be included if one validator joins. Yeah, true.
So at some point the validator set changes, otherwise we won't have, we wouldn't have any kind of validator rotation.
Yeah.
And that's just added to it, right? Like the bonding or unbonding, one of them was recently added in the latest.
Bonding was recently added.
Bonding. Okay, so they have not done unbonding then?
That's right. Unbonding is not implemented yet.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can join, but you can never leave.
Yeah. Awesome.
Okay, I'm inclined to skip down to play the friendly binary consensus or look at some graphs of it. What do people think about that, or should we keep going here with 1.3?
That sounds.
I would love to go to, yeah.
Can I ask the that I kept asking you, Joshi?
Yeah, sure. Let's see.
All right.
Yeah. Input
from somebody. I'm not 100% sure on this. Like, it's the dumbest question ever. When Byzantine faults are present, what are we talking? Like, what is consensus? What are we even talking about when we say we've come to consensus if there are Byzantine?
So I think the question was like, we all agree we're trying to reach consensus on this bit, right? Like we want to agree on a 1 or 0. There's some small number of us who are Byzantine who are like, trying to prevent the consensus for whatever reason. They're just being crappy and not following or maybe they're following the protocol, but never going to agree. They're never going to acknowledge that they've seen all these messages that say 1 because they want it to be 0. So what does it actually mean when we say we've reached consensus? Or is consensus in that usage like even something that is formally defined? Does that sound like the right question?
Yeah. Or is it just like you never that you've this, you just know that your estimate is safe or something like that?
I wonder if I can just get this paper.
I mean, does that question make sense? Because as we were playing the game, I felt like there was a point that question so needed to be in.
Well, okay, so maybe we need to actually show. I think we need to actually show the game. So I was going to try to experiment with this piece of whiteboard software that made a lot of sense when my Zoom tools weren't blocking parts. Okay, there we go. So I guess, what if we just like imagine we have Alice here, and Alice's weight is 3, and then we have Bob, who's also a validator, and Bob's weight is like 4, we'll say, and then we also have Claire, and her weight can be 5. So slightly different weights for everybody. And then, so the idea here is we're trying to reach consensus about a bit. And so Alice goes first, and let's just play this from Alice's perspective. So this is us right here. We're Alice. Maybe that should have been blue. Too late. Okay. So then Alice is the blue one, so she makes this message that says 1. So Alice thinks the answer that we're going to come to consensus to is 1, and I gotta get that. Her justification is empty. He hasn't seen anybody else sending any messages. So then let's say Bob goes. So Bob is going to go. He also says the consensus is 0. So Bob's justification is also empty, which means he hasn't seen Alice's message yet, or at least he's not acknowledging that he did. Maybe in reality he did see this message, but he wants the answer to finally be 0, so he's not acknowledging that he saw Alice's message. And then let's say a little bit later, so I'm thinking of time flowing down vertically, so like time 0 is up top, and then as we get later, things go down. And then so Claire comes along, and she has seen both messages. So if she's seen both of these messages, now the question is, what does Claire want to say that she thinks the answer is going to be? How does she estimate what the answer is?
You said both messages?
Yeah, so Claire has seen Alice's message and Bob's message.
Yeah, I would think she would go 0 because it's got weight 4, 3.
Yeah, so she goes 0 because she's seen both of these, and Bob has more weight than Alice does, so she has to agree with Bob. And so then we can put her pointers. Wow, I suck at using this so much. So Claire was going to say 0. I think maybe that's done now. And so then her pointers point back this way. These are her justification, right? She's acknowledged that she's seen both of these blocks. Okay, so
are those justifications or are those parents?
So parents are not relevant in friendly binary consensus. So parents are interesting when we start talking about Casper the Friendly Ghost, because Ghost allows us to have multiple parents. But in friendly binary consensus, the only thing we're talking about is justifications.
Okay.
So justifications are acknowledgements of other messages that you've seen. So in general, you're supposed to include a message from each other validator. Now, Alice didn't do that because she just hadn't seen any other messages, and likewise with Bob. But now Claire has seen these messages, so she's pointing back to them.
Okay.
Okay, so let's play, we're Alice here, and let's say our goal as Alice is to make sure that the answer comes out to be 1. Like, we want it to be 1 for whatever reason. Maybe this means we want to meet at the mall as opposed to the movie theater or something, but we have some interest that we're not going to break the protocol or anything like that, but we're going to do our best to make sure we all choose 1. So as Alice, what kinds of messages can we say at this point?
Well, we could seeing anything because we'd have to change our mind.
Say that one more time.
Well, in a message from Bob, she'd have to change it to 0. And if she's seen a message from Claire, she'd have to change it to 0. So she can't have seen any of those, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Because she's the lightest validator here. So if she acknowledges seeing any of these, then she has to flip-flop to 0. And if her goal is to try to say 1, then this is all she can do. So we can draw the justification in just like this. And she's either legitimately not seen these messages, or she's pretending to have not seen them so that she doesn't have to flip-flop her answer. She's saying, well, I still want number 1. I still want 1 to be the answer. So Bob goes again. And now Bob can say, well, I can do that lower down. Bob says, well, it's 0. And damn it. And Bob can acknowledge all of these. Of course, he has to acknowledge his own previous message. He can also acknowledge Alice's and Claire's. And And Claire can come along and, in a really similar way, still say 0. And she can acknowledge this one and this one and this one. So the question is, like, if Alice is sort of being obstinate here and never acknowledging any of these messages, well, what the heck, like, can we ever say, and
one second, Yoshi.
Yeah.
Actually, Claire does not need to acknowledge Alice at this point because Alice is already included in Bob's.
Yeah, great point. Okay, so you're saying, like, by acknowledging Bob's message here, we're also acknowledging Alice's because Bob has himself acknowledged Alice's. Yeah, that's a great point. I think you're right. So let's get that out of here. Okay, cool. Yeah. So like, I guess the question is, what kinds of statements can we make? I think we can say that Claire knows that 0 is a safe estimate because more than half of the total weight, 9 out of 12 of the weight is saying 0. And likewise with Bob can say that 0 is a safe estimate because 9 out of the 12 weight is saying 0. But I guess we can never force Alice to say 0, right? She can continue to say, sorry guys, I haven't seen any messages from you. I'm just going to continue saying 1.
Yeah, Byzantine anyway. It's like not hear any messages, I guess, or just not follow the protocol.
Yeah, right. So if she doesn't follow the protocol, we get to slash her, right?
Well, that's only if she.
That's only if,
or at least that's my understanding. But I thought slashing only is if you equivocate.
Yeah, you were saying breaking the protocol, right?
Right. Well, just not, put. So we're talking about having seen messages and not putting them into the justification. Right?
Oh, yeah, you're okay. Good point. So that is breaking the protocol, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
not really. I mean, you can't know whether she hasn't received the message yet or that she's just ignoring them.
Right. So there was some kind of, we don't know, it's what Birch called a non-attributable fault, I think, right? We can't prove that she's done anything wrong. She might just have a crappy internet connection.
Yep.
Yeah. And for all intents, just not get messages from it.
Right. Cool. Okay. So the question that I was hoping maybe you guys can help me answer is, like, what kinds of statements can we make here? Oh, I guess we're up to the top of the hour already, but should we wrap it here and then meet again next week?
Yeah, sure. One thing to your example. So actually, if we got it right with this graphic, so if Bob is the bad guy, he was able to manipulate the solution, but somehow we make it dependent on the sequence that he first put the message. When Alice was the bad guy and the other two were the good guys, she cannot change the real value if 0 is the real value.
Yeah.
She has less than 1/3.
She has less than 1/3 of the total weight. Yeah, right. Good point. Okay. All right. Should we call it a day? Cool. Thanks for attending, everybody. And I guess we'll meet next week at the same time, and then maybe we can pick up by reading over a little bit of this portion of the paper together. And then my hope is that we'll be able to decide, like, what kinds of valuable statements can anyone in this graph make? Like, can Bob and Claire, what can they say about consensus that they've reached and things like that? What kinds of consensus have they reached? So, okay, thank you for attending today. I really appreciate it. And then we will meet up next time.
Thank you, Yoshi.
Thank you, Yoshi.
Thank
It was
you.
fun. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Bye.